Welcome, everyone. Today is April 22nd, 2021. This is the ACIM Palm Beach Study Group. Let us begin with a moment of silence. Thank you. Okay, we are on page 32 in the text. This is chapter 2, section 7, and we're on paragraph 4, starting where we left off last week, but I'm going to read the last paragraph, the last sentence rather, of the paragraph before that to begin with. So that's sentence 13. The fundamental conflict in this world, then, is between creation and miscreation. All fear is implicit in the second, and all love in the first. The conflict is therefore one between love and fear. And that is the conflict between love and fear. So paragraph 4 starts, it has already been said that you believe you cannot control fear because you yourself made it, and your belief in it seems to render it out of your control. Yet any attempt to resolve the error through attempting the mastery of fear is useless. In fact, it I lost my place. In fact, it asserts the power of fear, and it asserts the power of fear by the very assumption that it need be mastered. The true resolution rests entirely on mastery through love. In the interim, however, the sense of conflict is inevitable, since you have placed yourself in a position where you believe in the power of what does not exist. So basically what they're saying is that all conflict is between love and fear. But we're the ones that created fear. Spirit created love, or God, or the Father, whatever term you want to use, created love. And so we feel that, we can't have any control over the fear because we created it ourselves, and we're of the belief that fear is out of our control. So what it's saying is what needs to be done is to look to love to overcome the fear. So when you turn to the Spirit, that's the way you rid yourself of the fear.
John?
Yes.
What does miscreation mean? I've never heard of that word.
Well, that was the ego creation. When we created the ego, we miscreated, because God did not create the ego, we did.
So what would be the definition of miscreated? Ego
Our,
created?
yes, our creations,
Our creation.
human
Fear is a
beings.
miscreation.
I understand. I just didn't know what the word miscreation meant.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the miscreation, if we had created with love, we would not have created the ego, and then it would not have been a miscreation. So don't place yourself in a position where you believe in the power of what does not exist, because, and one of the reasons why it's a miscreation is because it doesn't exist. There's really no existence to the ego. It's a dream. It's an illusion. It's a false creation. Number 5, nothing and everything cannot coexist. Nothing and everything cannot coexist. To believe in one is to deny the other. Fear is really nothing, and love is everything. Whenever light enters darkness, the darkness is abolished. What you believe is true for you. What you believe is true for you. In this sense, the separation has occurred, and to deny it is merely to use denial inappropriately. So nothing and everything cannot coexist. The ego and spirit cannot coexist. To believe in one is to deny the other. Believing in the ego is denying the spirit. Believing in the spirit is denying the ego. And whenever light enters the darkness is abolished. See, the darkness isn't real. Darkness is just the absence of light. Whenever you bring light into a dark room, there's no darkness anymore, because light dispels the darkness. Spirit dispels the ego. The ego doesn't really exist. It just appears to be that way because when there's no light in it, it becomes the darkness. So what you believe is true for you. So it all hinges on what you believe and what you have faith in. People who believe in the ego and have faith in the ego, that's what's going to be real for them. People who believe in spirit and have faith in the spirit, that is what will be true for them. Whatever you believe is true for you. In this sense, the separation has occurred, in the sense that if you believe in ego, then you'd believe in the separation, but that's a false belief. And to deny it is merely to use denial inappropriately. So we can say all along, I don't believe in ego, I don't believe in ego, I don't believe in ego, but that's not doing anything. The only way to not believe in ego is to say, I believe in spirit, I have faith in spirit, I have faith and belief in spirit. That's how you displace the ego. However, paragraph 7, to concentrate on error is only a further error. Again, to concentrate on getting rid of ego is just another error. That's an inappropriate way to handle the situation. The initial corrective procedure is to recognize temporarily that there is a problem. Now it's starting to sound like AA, right? Admitting that there's a problem, but only as an indication that immediate correction is needed. This establishes a state of mind in which the atonement can be accepted without delay. It should be emphasized, however, that ultimately no compromise is possible between everything and nothing. Time is essentially a device by which all compromise in this respect can be given up. It only seems to be abolished by degrees because time itself involves intervals that do not exist. Miscreation made this necessary as a corrective device. The statement, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life," in quotes from the Bible, needs only one slight correction to be meaningful in this context. He gave it to his only begotten Son. So where the Bible quote says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son," the course is saying it should read, "For God so loved the world that he gave to his only begotten Son." Are there any questions now? You'll have to unmute, Ed. Press the unmute button.
On the bottom left.
In the small picture, it didn't. Okay.
There you go.
All right. Now, the way I see fear is that I don't want to cross I-95 on foot. Now, there's certain things you don't want to stick your head in the lion's mouth. That's how do we differentiate this use in this study from the world?
Yeah.
I
Okay.
have a problem with understanding in some
Yeah.
respects the term ego, because there's some things in something's vibrating our window.
Well, okay.
Anyway, I don't understand
Yeah,
sometimes.
I understand your question, Ed. So, yeah, you might have a fear of trying to cross 95 with all that traffic, and I'll term it mundane fear. But they're talking about the fear of hell. Let's put it that way. People who believe in hell have the fear that God's going to punish them when they die. That's a real ego fear. That's we're not talking about mundane fears of although we could put it into that category if it's appropriate. Fear of dying, fear of going to hell, those kind of fears. See, the ego is going to tell you that. The ego is going to tell you that this is the only life you have to live, and if you didn't give enough money to the church, you're going to go to hell. So you didn't keep all the commandments. Who can keep all the commandments all of the time? Nobody can, because it's a double bind. Ego has us in a double bind situation. It's not even possible.
How do you define the ego in this regard? I've read 200 pages, but I'm not just all sure I understand I mean, anything that's not spiritual is ego.
Okay.
Anything that's not love is ego.
Okay.
Does ego serve some kind of purpose in the corporeal world?
Ego is the corporeal world.
Okay.
John?
Yes, Diane.
Okay, so when I was thinking about fears, I wasn't thinking about going to hell because that's not something I normally fear, so I don't even think about it. But what I was thinking about was like fear of the other, like there's so much talk about fear of people of color versus people who aren't of color, or fears of um I was thinking on other kinds of levels, not like crossing the street on 95, but more like fear of the other, or fear of uh, I don't know, maybe fears like people have on their jobs, or maybe that they won't be successful, or I don't know, just different kinds of fears. I wasn't thinking about, yeah.
Okay, so those are good examples. Fear of the other. You see, ego is going to point out all of the differences between you and the other. And ego's thought system is us and them. And there's fears there because of differences. Spirit is going to say, there's nothing to fear because there's only one of you. You are the other. There is no us and them. They are you and you are they. There is that of God in everyone, and that's what unifies us all. So when we have a spiritual attitude, we can look at anybody, regardless of their race, color, creed, political thing, anything at all, whatever differences ego is going to point out to us, and we can say, oh yeah, I see all of those differences, but you know what? There's God in me, there's God in them, we're all one together. There's only one of us, as your husband likes to say. So that
Right.
spells the fear because you've turned to a spiritual understanding of it. The other fear of not being successful, worrying about, that I don't have enough money, or I don't have a place to live, or I don't have a good job, or what have you. That's all ego stuff. Because to think spiritually, you'd say, well, I have faith that Spirit will always provide for me. I don't have to worry about those things. Spirit is the source and the substance of all of my supply. I'll always be successful. I'll always have enough to eat. I'll always have a place to live. And when that becomes your attitude, then Spirit cooperates with you in bringing those things to you in the ego world. It fixes it. But if you're afraid of not having enough money and afraid of not being successful, well, then fear will take over, ego will take over, and make your fears become real in the ego world. But Spirit can dispel that. So on all those kinds of fears, again, there's always a spiritual answer to it. Anyone else? Anybody else have anything? So paragraph 6. Yeah. Did you want to say something, David?
I wanted to ask you a question about, we gave it to his only begotten son.
Yeah.
With define son in that sentence.
You are the son.
We're all
We-
this.
We are the son. The only begotten son. There's only one of us.
So the quote above in the Bible, so God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whoever believes in it, so that's everybody. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you see, in the Christian mode in the Bible, they um, they're using the only begotten Son as Jesus. So in the Christian Bible, they're saying, "For God so loved the world that He gave Jesus, and that whoever believes in Jesus should not perish but have everlasting life." But what the Course is saying is that God so loved the world that he gave you. And whoever believes in if you believe in yourself, you won't perish or have everlasting life in your spiritual self, in the spirit that who you truly are. You're not your body. You are an immortal spirit, whole and innocent. And if
So
that's what you believe, that's what gives you everlasting life, is your belief in that you're a spiritual being.
that makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Alrighty then. Anyone else? Okay, Eileen. Okay.
Yeah, just a quick question. Is that saying that depending on what you do or don't believe, you either have everlasting life or you die?
No, because the fact of the matter is that you are a spiritual being. You are an eternal spiritual being. That's the truth. That's the fact. To think otherwise is ego thinking. So if you don't believe that, then your body will die. You'll leave the ego world on earth for a bit, and then you'll come back again to try it all over. See if you catch on the next time.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. 6, it should especially be noted that God has only one Son. So that goes back to your question, David. If all his creations are his sons, everyone must be an integral part of the whole sonship. I'm just going to point out again, is this some people have issues with the language and the Course. Why don't they say son and daughter? Why don't they say, well, no, they're keeping it as simple as possible. Because in the spirit world, there's no male and female any which way. We all reincarnate as men and we all reincarnate as women. That's not the issue. That's an ego thing. So they don't even address that. They use son because that's the most convenient English word that they have to relate the meaning. Not even child, because child intonates somebody who's really young and can't understand. But that's not us. We have the power of understanding. We're not children. Although we all are children of God. Yes, okay, that's true, but we're all God's creation, but we are the son and we are the sonship, and it doesn't matter if you're male or female or black or white or Democrat or Republican or anything else. It's just all those divisions are ego thinking. So the book wants to, the Course wants to present a unified language to symbolize, remember all language is symbol, the meaning behind the words. So don't get caught up on the the maleness of the word sonship or son. Sentence 3. The sonship in its oneness transcends the sum of its parts. However, this is obscured as long as any of its parts is missing. That is why the conflict cannot ultimately be resolved until all the parts of the sonship have reunited. Only then can the meaning of wholeness in the true sense be understood. Any part of the sonship can believe in error or incompleteness if he so chooses. However, if he does so, he is believing in the existence of nothingness. The correction of this error is the atonement. So, in the ego timeline, as people individually reach their own personal atonement and escape from the ego world and reunite with the oneness of spirit, and we have words for that: reaching enlightenment, transcending, things like that. Then it becomes, over time, it's a collective. More and more of it collects until finally the whole. So stop and think of it like you've got a big bottle, and you've got a funnel, and you're throwing sand from another big bucket into the funnel, and then the funnel lets the sand trickle down. Well, eventually, the big bucket that the sand is in is going to filter through and all be collected in the second bucket until there's nothing left. But it had to go through the funnel for that to happen. And that's what's happening now. There are individual entities in the ego world that have already reached enlightenment, like the Jesus, like the Buddha, and people like that. And so they've gone through the funnel into the next bucket. And we're in that process. Because we're studying the Course, you could say, we're no longer in the big bucket to begin with, we're in the funnel now. See, we're getting channeled through the funnel now and learning all of these things and applying them in our ego life. And eventually we'll get through that, we'll get through the enlightenment and into the collection of those who have been enlightened. And over time, everybody will. That's the promise that Spirit makes us, that everyone will eventually reach the enlightenment and the ego world will completely dissolve.
Well, when you die, doesn't it dissolve? Because you go back into spirit.
Well, if you die without going through the enlightenment, without going through the atonement, then you're in a holding space until you can reincarnate and try it again.
But is that really true? Because your spirit never dies. When your body dies, your spirit is released. So whether you had that awakening of awareness about your spirit, isn't your spirit pure anyway? So when you die, isn't that pure? So, I mean, maybe if you're reborn, you have to go through all the trials and tribulations again where you left off. But for that brief period of time when you die, isn't your spirit kind of released and at one with God, that at one mint? Well, atonement would be at one mint.
First of all, we are already one with God.
No, but I'm saying,
even in these bodies, we're still at one with God because there's only one of us and we're spiritual beings. But when you reach the atonement for yourself individually, and you become what we'll term as an enlightened being, then you go on to a completely different spiritual dimension where you need not reincarnate anymore. But if your ego body dies and you haven't reached that point yet, you are in a spirit world, but you're in a temporary spirit world, not a permanent spirit world, a temporary world where you evaluate your past life and you contemplate, what lessons you did learn and what lessons you didn't learn, and then you plan your next incarnation. There's a whole process that's involved. You plan on who you're going to reincarnate as to give you the lessons that you still need to learn. And you go through this over and over and over again until you finally reach that last incarnation.
Yes, what John, as you're saying this, I would imagine that you'd have to have a mind in order to make these plans or whatever. So I'm thinking that I'm thinking when a person is dead, their spirit is sort of free and it's at one with God, sort of connecting back into that oneness. If the person wasn't aware before that, and that then if you're reborn, then you sort of pick up where you left off. I don't know if there's really a plan, because if you don't have a mind, how can there be a plan?
You always have a mind. Even after you reach enlightenment, you have a mind. Mind is forever and always.
So you're saying when you're dead, you have a mind?
Yes, the mind is not the brain. The brain is just a tool. It's a tool of the body. The
So
mind is not the brain.
Jen, can we go back to the definition of atonement again, please?
The correction of the error is atonement. It said that was the last paragraph. Last sentence 9. The correction of the error, becoming enlightened and embracing true forgiveness is the correction of the error, and that's the atonement.
Thank you.
and John,
Yes.
this may be ego, but at times I feel that, like, let's say the last 2 weeks, I was in spirit, and then it goes away. I'm back in ego. Is there a balance or one or the other? Or if you're not, I don't understand the whole thing, because I think I'm guessing it's my ego that's telling me I'm in spirit.
Does this happen when you're meditating?
Sometimes, but I had a period of like last couple of weeks, I felt like I was in spirit, but not every minute of the day. But when I needed to be there for somebody or some group, the right words came out of my mouth. The oneness, words of oneness. It's hard to describe.
Yeah, no, you're having those experiences in the ego world because you are connecting more and more with your spiritual self. So that is part of the process, and especially in meditation, but it can also be in your waking life when you're fully conscious and with other people and all. That just shows you your progression. It doesn't happen all of a sudden. It's not a thing where you're in the ego 1 second and the next second, wow, you switch and you're completely in spirit and you're an enlightened being. No, it's a gradual process. So the closer you get to enlightenment, the more of these spiritual awarenesses you will have.
The other thing is, I was just thinking, I've been getting better sleep, and some of my dreams, and the last stage of sleeping during the night, there's a clarity in those dreams, and they're meaningful.
Yes, and that the dream state is one where we are most susceptible to spiritual understandings and lessons that come to us. So that's all good. Everything you're describing is good, and it illustrates the process of moving into a deeper spiritual understanding. So you're making progress, David.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, then paragraph 7. I have already briefly spoken about readiness, but some additional points might be helpful here. Readiness is only the prerequisite for accomplishment. The two should not be confused. As soon as a state of readiness occurs, there is usually some degree of desire to accomplish, but it is by no means necessarily undivided. The state does not imply more than a potential for a change of mind. Confidence cannot develop fully until mastery has been accomplished. We have already attempted to correct the fundamental error that fear can be mastered, and have emphasized that the only real mastery is through love. Readiness is only the beginning of confidence. You may think this implies that an enormous amount of time is necessary between readiness and mastery, but let me remind you that time and space are under my control, under Spirit's control. So that whole paragraph relates, David, to what you were sharing about your experiences. Anyone? Well, that finishes section 7. And now we're on to section 8, which is the last section of this chapter. So let's go on. Paragraph 1. One of the ways in which you can correct the magic miracle confusion is to remember that you did not create yourself. You are apt to forget this when you become egocentric, and this puts you in a position where a belief in magic is virtually inevitable. Your will to create was given you by your Creator, who was expressing the same will in his creation. Since creative ability rests in the mind, everything you create is necessarily a matter of will. It also follows that whatever you alone make is real in your own sight, though not in the mind of God. This basic distinction leads directly into the real meaning of the Last Judgment. Anyone? I'll go over it again. One of the ways in which you can correct the magic miracle confusion, the ego spirit confusion, is to remember that you did not create yourself. God created us, and there's only one of us. You are apt to forget this when you become egocentric. When you're in your ego, you don't remember this. And this puts you in a position where a belief in magic, a belief in ego, is virtually inevitable. Your will to create was given you by your creator, and we all have free will, who was expressing the same will in his creation. He willed us into being. That's how he created us. Since creative ability rests in the mind, this all happens in the mind, everything you create is necessarily a matter of will. Everything you create in the ego world comes from your own free will. It also follows that whatever you alone make is real in your own sight. Again, whatever you believe is true for you. So whatever you make out of your own will, out of your own mind, is real in your own sight, though not in the mind of God. Because if it's ego will that's doing the creation, the ego mind doing the creation, then it's not of the spiritual mind. So it's not in the mind of God. The basic distinction leads directly into the real meaning of the Last Judgment. And before you ask, what's the Last Judgment? We'll go to paragraph 2. The Last Judgment is one of the most threatening ideas in your thinking. This is because you do not understand it. Judgment is not an attribute of God. It is brought into being only after the separation, when it became one of the many learning devices to be built into the overall plan. Just as the separation occurred over millions of years, the Last Judgment will extend over a similarly long period, and perhaps even a longer one. Its length can, however, be greatly shortened by miracles, the device for shortening but not abolishing time. If a sufficient number become truly miracle-minded, this shortening process can be virtually immeasurable. It is essential, however, that you free yourself from fear quickly, because you must emerge from the conflict if you are to bring peace to other minds. So the miracle is forgiveness. The more that we can truly forgive on spiritual level, not on the ego level, then we are involved in the process of shortening the time for total enlightenment. And as we join with those who are doing that, and it's the same process, then we're adding our effort to it, and it becomes cumulative. It becomes stronger and stronger because there's more and more of us that are working the miracles, that are forgiving from a spiritual point of view. And so that is how we can bring peace to everyone else, because whatever we do for ourselves, we automatically do for our brothers. And whatever we do for our brothers, we automatically do for ourselves, because there's only one of us. So whatever you do to anyone else, you're doing to yourself. If you have a hate thought towards somebody, you're hating yourself. If you have a love thought towards somebody, thought of compassion or forgiveness, then you're doing that to yourself. Everybody is a mirror of everybody else. Any questions? Comments? Yes, David or Diane?
Diane left the room. Last week I had a reaction to something that was going on. Two people were arguing, and I was upset by it. And I asked myself, why am I so upset if it's two other people arguing? And I came up with it, as a child, there was a lot of fighting and arguing in my family. And I said I would never subject myself to that. And what I did was I left the house I was visiting in. So I had to work hard for forgiveness. And I don't think I totally forgave, because it was all, I guess, would that be ego, reaction? I know one of the people in the argument felt hurt by the other person. The other person didn't mean to hurt them, but somehow I got into my past got into this current argument, which had nothing to do with my past, just the noise and the yelling. How would you explain that?
Well, it's understandable that a situation such as this can trigger thoughts and feelings from the past. And the important thing is that you did try to deal with it as lovingly as you could by removing yourself from the situation and trying to forgive the situation. I mean, you had other options. You could have jumped into the argument and started yelling and screaming at them, "Stop arguing!" But but you chose to try to react to the situation as spiritually as you could, and we can't ask anything more. We're in a learning process, and we learn through our experiences, and we learn through our mistakes, and we learn by trying over and over again. So just give yourself credit for trying the best you could in the situation. And if you feel that you still haven't completely forgiven the situation, then continue to work on that, because there's no deadline. There's no deadline on forgiveness. You can forgive things that have happened in past lives if that comes to your awareness. If you remember something from a past life that was a traumatic situation, you can still forgive that in this life. There's no deadline on forgiveness. There's no deadline on love. So the other thing is that because we are all one, and these people were in your space, and it triggered a childhood memory, and that was just part of sympathizing with them, and recalling the oneness of us all. That does that make any sense?
It does. Like I felt like I was spun out of my spirit self into my ego self in that situation.
Yeah.
It was very upsetting.
Yeah, and a lot of things happen to us day by day that that are similar to that, because ego will always kick and scream and try its darndest to get you back in the fold of ego thinking. So, which makes it all more important for us to hold steady the course of spiritual mindedness.
I decided I'm going to sing What the World Needs Now is Love, Sweet Love. It's the only thing that there's too little of. Think I need singing lessons?
Well, that's okay. All right, let's go. There's only a couple more paragraphs left. Let's see if we can just follow through to the end of this chapter. Paragraph 3. The last judgment is generally thought the last judgment is generally thought of as a procedure undertaken by God. Actually, it will be undertaken by my brothers with my help. It is a final healing rather than a melting out of punishment, however much you may think that punishment is deserved. Punishment is a concept totally opposed to right-mindedness, and the aim of the last judgment is to restore right-mindedness to you. The last judgment might be called the process of right evaluation. It simply means that everyone will finally come to understand what is worthy and what is not. After this, the ability to choose can be directed rationally. Until this distinction is made, however, the vacillations between free and imprisoned cannot but continue. The first step towards freedom involves a sorting out of the false from the truth. This is a process of separation in the constructive sense and reflects the true meaning of the apocalypse. Everyone will ultimately look upon his own creations and choose to preserve only what is good, just as God himself looked upon what he had created and knew that it was good. At this point, the mind can begin to look with love on its own creations because of their worthiness. At the same time, the mind will inevitably disown its miscreations, which, without belief, will no longer exist. The term last judgment is frightening not only because it has been projected onto God, but also because of the association of last with death. This is an outstanding example of upside down perception. If the meaning of the last judgment is objectively examined, it is quite apparent that it is really the doorway to life. No one who lives in fear is really alive. Your own last judgment cannot be directed toward yourself because you are not your own creation. You can, however, apply it meaningfully and at any time to everything you have made and retain in your memory only what is creative and good. This is what your right-mindedness cannot but decide. The purpose of time is solely to give you time to achieve this judgment. It is your own perfect judgment of your own perfect creations. When everything you retain is lovable, there is no reason for fear to remain with you. This is your part in the atonement. So we do create with our mind all of the time. When we create fear, those are miscreations. Those are ego creations. But when we love, when we create love, compassion, and good things, those are good creations, and we can keep those. Those have value because they were created with spirit, not with the ego. So the last judgment is us deciding what to keep and what to release. And we want to keep that which we created from spirit and release whatever we created with ego. And eventually we'll have our last judgment when we get rid of the last thing we created with ego. And how do you do that? You forgive it. That's what true forgiveness is saying that didn't really exist. That was just a miscreation. And I forgive it. I let it go. I forgive it because it was all ego. It never really existed in the first place. So I don't have to hold on to that. Are there any questions? Yes, Dave.
The way to get rid of ego, I guess, is sending it. Actually, getting rid of fear is sending it love.
Yes.
And fear keeps creeping in.
Yeah. Ego will keep badgering at you.
Keep sending it love. Be persistent.
The only thing to fear is fear itself.
There you go. There you go. Anyone else? We're at the end. We've reached the end of that chapter. We'll start a whole new chapter next week. So time for last questions, comments. Anyone? Eileen?
Yeah, I'm trying to formulate how to put what I'm thinking into a sentence. I kind of have a sense that there's like a kind of a possibility maybe of viewing these kinds of things that seem at odds with spirit as actually opportunities to practice making a different choice. You know, that every time something like a trigger, the word trigger comes up, that this is a moment that's actually a gift, you know, an opportunity to choose a different response, one that is from spirit, even if it was instigated by ego. And also the idea that fear, and this is where I'm going to trip a little bit, I think, in how to put this into words, but that fear might be your friend. It might be your friend in terms of creating that same opportunity, that if you find yourself in a moment of fear, that you could use that as a kind of signpost that this is a moment where you have a choice, that one of these opportunities has shown up where you can make a different choice that brings you closer to spirit, or a choice from spirit in a place where something that ego created started, which is where the fear showed from to begin with. Is that making any sense at all?
It not only made sense, but it was a beautiful explanation. That is so right on. Yes. Yes.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Yeah.
I'm glad to have that perspective.
Yes. All of those opportunities that come to us so that we can have the opportunity to use our free will to decide for spirit over ego. And when we do, then we're taking part of the process of the atonement of true forgiveness and love and understanding that and working with spirit instead of ego. I always say that, when in fear, have faith. When fear comes along, my response to that is, oh, I don't have to be afraid because I have faith. I know that spirit will always take care of me, that spirit is always with me, that spirit can heal any situation. And so I have faith. And Jesus taught this, and many others did too. So, anyone else?
When's the Messiah coming?
You're already here.
So my ego says, right?
Ed, Manasseh, Lauren, anything to say before we end for today? You're all good? All righty, I just want to thank you all for participating this evening and joining us. And let us end with a moment of silence.